Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and is also heard on other formats, YouTube. Camp Constitution has a YouTube channel, and we put these shows up on a regular basis, and also IPMNation.org, which is an online 24-hour news source coming out of New Hampshire. And the show is rebroadcast on that station at 1 p.m. on Saturday afternoons, Eastern Standard Time. And also Podomatic. Podomatic is an online place for doing podcasts and also archiving various things of this nature. So we started this just a few weeks ago, and we're already number 4 for conservative right listing. So I appreciate it if you want to visit that. Podomatic, and you'll be able to download some of these programs. I sort of try to get the best of the radio shows, all the different people we've interviewed over the last couple of years, including Dr. Duke Pesta and Alex Newman and Lord Monckton and Sam Blumenfeld, many others that Patrick Wood, the man who wrote who pulled out the trilaterals over America, and many other, and we also are posting some oldies too. Like I just posted a speech by Gary Allen, who authored Undercover Conspiracy. This program is brought to you by Camp Constitution, which, among other things, runs a week-long family camp, and we are in the process of expanding our outreach. Next year's camp, so far just one camp, but we hope to schedule at least another one, and if not, maybe a weekend camp. Anyway, the next year's camp is August 5th to the 11th, and it is located in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires. And we've already got some great instructors lined up, including Dr. Duke Pesta, who is just confirmed that a couple of days ago, one of the foremost experts on Common Core. He's traveled around the United States giving hundreds of presentations, and he'll be giving a few classes at our camp, as well as Lord Monckton, Christopher Monckton, the patriotic Englishman, who was not only is he an expert on the climate change fraud, but he's also was instrumental in getting England to get out, the UK to get out of the European Union, the Brexit movement. And we're delighted that he'll be there. And Willie Soon, Professor Soon, will be returning. And we have others lined up, so it should be just probably the best lineup of instructors we've had since in our 10 years. Anyway,
I'll be there too. I'll be there.
I know. Oh, you know, well, Tom, I have to say the best for last. I've got on the line here. I should say he's more of a co-host than a guest, but Tom Moor, what's spelled Moor, not Moore. But Tom is not only is he a camp instructor, he is a gifted musician who plays the guitar at campfire, and he I would call him a historian. And I think his expertise is sort of New England and Greater Boston. And we're going to talk a little bit about the godly heritage of Boston, Massachusetts. And you might think, kind of tune this out. I would say that if you look at our nation's founders and founding, that all of the cities and all of the towns had pretty much the same background. But we're doing this because we were told, the Camp Constitution, as some of you have been following, has been denied a permit to raise the Christian flag over City Hall, which is on what I would call it a public access flagpole. And the reason being, of course, the separation of church and state. Well, Tom, give us a little background. You've been doing some research on the great Governor John Winthrop, and
sure.
I'm going to talk about my trip. Now, I live right in Boston.
Yeah.
I'm in the West Rock, and you're just literally a stone's throw over the river.
Hal, I can't believe you didn't take me on this trip. I would have loved to do that tour with you.
Well, you can always do it again. What I did, Tom, is I just and it's on our YouTube channel. I put it up there. It's I'm not an expert filmographer. But what I did is I just walked around Boston Common, which I think is the oldest such place in the country. It was created in 1634. And then across the street is the beautiful public gardens, which goes back to the 1840s or 50s. And just to look at the monuments, the statues, and you think you're in the Bible Belt region, you see. So, Tom, give us some background on the founding of Boston and the great John Winthrop.
Absolutely, Hal. And I will do this as with a mind to our independence and our Constitution. We are Camp Constitution. Of course, we think of 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, and we think of 1787, our great Constitution, 1789, our Bill of Rights, which we just in September passed those milestones. What we might not know is there was something like America that existed 150 years earlier. So first, of course, we have the Pilgrims coming and getting a foothold in Plymouth in 1620. And that was a very small group, very, very religious, of course. And so they get a foothold. So there's a group in England called the Puritans. And the Puritans see corruption in England. And then they see Charles I coming in 1625. And things are getting worse. The economy is getting worse. These are also very, very hardworking, industrious people, mostly in East Anglia. This is the part of England northeast of London. And those around East Anglia, you have names of counties like Essex County, Norfolk, Suffolk, and of course the eastern counties of Massachusetts have these same names. Okay, so Winthrop. They decide after about 5 years of Charles that things are just going to get worse for the Puritans. So they could not reform it in England. So they decide to leave. And now this is interesting. So you have the Massachusetts Bay. This is how America was formed. You have the Massachusetts Bay Company. It's a stockholders company. And stockholders companies, they meet once a year, right? Okay, so here's Winthrop's genius. Winthrop studied at Cambridge, as did my ancestor Thomas Dudley, also an early a friend of Winthrop and a colonial governor. So, and he had studied at Gray's Inn in London, which is so he was an attorney, right? So once he gets over to America, and he sees that, or before that, he sees that Virginia has had their charter revoked. So he doesn't want to have Massachusetts' charter revoked. So he brings the charter with him, and in that charter it has the ability to elect the corporate governor. Okay, the corporate governor. So we're a corporation now, Hal. Here's the magic sleight of hand. We get to, as soon as he gets to Massachusetts, and we'll go over the great speech he gives a little later, but as soon as he gets there, he holds a corporate meeting, and he invites who? He invites, of course, the shareholders that were on board, but he also invites all of the freemen of this new colony. And those freemen will elect their governor. It will not be a royally appointed governor like all the other colonies of Great Britain. No. So we go from being not just the Massachusetts Bay Company, but the Massachusetts Bay Colony of not just shareholders, but all freemen. And this is the first meeting of the General Court, which is now our state government. It's still called that. It's the first meeting of what Winthrop calls a commonwealth. And Massachusetts is not just a state. We are a commonwealth, and very proud of that. That's where that term comes from, Winthrop. So right away, that is the founding of America right there, Hal. You have a corporation which is turned into a commonwealth, and not just shareholders, but any, landholding men. They're going to have a stake in this colony. Of course, they are very, very godly Christians, absolutely. And then they're going to incorporate towns. Each of the towns will have town meetings in which everyone can take part. The town meetings will send representatives to the General Court. This is the beginning of popular government in America, Hal.
And that's also referred to it's still referred to as the Great and General Court. I think the general would be what the House of Representatives, and the great would be the Senate. Is that how it's defined?
I think at that time it was unicameral. It was just one court.
Okay.
And, of course, several things. They started building ships with pine trees. So we have the pine tree, the pine cone, the golden pine cone on top of the State House. And what did they fished the cod. And we have the big wooden codfish, which they would salt the codfish, and then they could send the cod overseas and trade with that. So the beginning of the pine tree with the pine cone and the cod.
Well, there's a beautiful little poem that said, "Boston, Boston, the home of the bean and the cod, where the Cabots only talk to the lodges and the lodges only talk to God," or something like
God,
that.
Yes.
Well, Tom, it's an incredible story, and it's something that, I mean, when you learn, even if you learn U.S. history in what's now these government schools, you wouldn't get a lot of details. What you probably get is these evil Eurocentric males came over here to exploit and rape Indians. That's probably what you get. And in fact, if you read Tom Wood's book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, the relationships we had with the Indians was very, very fair and decent for the most part, the early part of our settling. The king granted the charter, but the charter didn't give you political hegemony, but not the land. The land was something that you had to negotiate with the tribes, and of course, a lot of the land was not owned by anybody. It was you settle here and say, well, I don't see a fence, I don't see and the concept of private property was a whole different concept to the Indians. And many of the Indians wanted to be under English law. And that's why, not only that, but they wanted English names. That's why
Right.
You hear about the King Philip's War. Well, why was King Philip? Who was this King Philip? This Indian? Well, King Philip, he wanted an English name, but he wouldn't accept Christianity, so they gave him the name of Philip of Macedonia. That's where he got the name. And his brother Alexander, he wouldn't accept Christianity either. And it was also John Eliot, the famous John Eliot, or he's not as well known, Tom, but he's the one that he said, hey, we're over here to propagate the gospel. That's one of the reasons why we came here. And we're not doing a good job of that because just surviving was the key thing. So he learned the Indian language, the Algonquin language. It was not a written language. And not only did he learn it, but then he had to put an alphabet to it. And he taught the converts to Christianity. And the first thing that was printed, or the first thing was printed in the colonies was the Algonquin Bible. And I think there are only two copies still in existence because they're in the process of reprinting it. And if you don't read Algonquin, it's not going to be much help to you. But during the King Philip's Wars, King Philip, one of his goals was to completely obliterate the Indian Christians. And that's the kind of history that you're not going to get. Now, Tom, I know you and I have been in Boston, downtown Boston, hundreds of times. And a lot, on the Boston Common for rallies and public gardens with the beautiful swan boats. And sometimes it's easy to overlook these monuments and plaques, but monuments tell us a lot about your history, your nation's history, your state's history, your city's history. And if you get off at Park Square, the subway stop, walk up the stairs, you'll see a plaque. It was put there well over 100 years ago. And it has a little history of Boston Common and the term "in the year of our Lord." Now, you might say, oh, Hal, that's a technicality. But the term "in the year of our Lord," which was in many legal documents and still is, has now been changed to the CE, Common Era.
Right.
Which they should say Communist Era, to obliterate any Christian history. And then taking a short walk from there, you're walking on the Tremont Street side of Boston Common, which would be the south side. You'll see a monument, a little tablet commemorating Lafayette, the great Marquis de Lafayette, who helped us quite a bit during the War for Independence, Revolutionary War. And you'll read the inscription, and they referred to him as liberty was a spark from heaven. Then a little further up the street, you see the Declaration of Independence. It's a tablet. It's really hard to read. I guess it's been there for a while, and of course the weather takes its toll. But we all know what the Declaration of Independence says. It says we are endowed by what? Not by Darwin, but by our Creator.
Yes.
With unalienable rights, et cetera, et cetera. Then you walk down. By the way, if you see, you'll see the sign, a big sign. There's like 6 of them.
Let me speak just for one moment before we get off the topic of the Declaration of Independence. Sure. We have an esteemed British visitor coming. I can't wait to meet Lord Monckton. And it's interesting that before our Declaration of Independence, 6 months before, it was a very recent British arrival, that being Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine was the first to declare independence in his pamphlet Common Sense. And it was that pamphlet. Most people don't realize that he was fresh off the boat from England. And what he basically said was, he basically addressed the fact, he said, look, you don't want to have representation in a British Parliament that will always vote you down. You have been semi-independent from the beginning. And then he quoted the book of Samuel, which Winthrop preached against, where God says, kings are not my first idea here, guys.
Right, you're right.
Only supposed to be one king in the Bible, and that's Jesus Christ. And that's exactly how those Puritans felt. And Paine called attention to this. Paine understood the Puritan mind of those early settlers with Winthrop, and you read Common Sense, and you read basically the early Puritan history of America and why we were already semi-independent and separate from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyway, so the sign has the seal of Boston, and the seal goes back. Boston didn't become a city, I think, until 1820 or 21, somewhere around there. But the seal is Latin, and part of that seal is it's from the First Kings, I think, chapter 8, verses 56, I think, or 57, and it says, as he favored our forefathers, may he favor us. He's talking about God. May God favor us as he favored our forefathers. Well, that's pretty biblical. That's nothing that, this was in 1820s. This wasn't in 1620. It was 1820s. And then you'll take a walk. You'll find a tablet commemorating Pope John Paul II's visit. And it was the first time that a sitting pope, when he was a cardinal, he actually stayed here for a while in Boston. But here he is, Pope, and he holds a mass on Boston Common. Now, the last time I checked, a mass is a religious service. Tom, would I be a little facetious? And also flying on a Boston flagpole was the Vatican flag. Then you take a walk to the.
I can speak just a little on that, Hal. Just very briefly, I was fortunate to have traveled in Eastern Europe in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. I was there. I was there in Czechoslovakia. I was there in Hungary when those revolutions happened. Yep. And those were all directly inspired originally by the Polish Revolution, where they held Mass at their meetings.
That's right.
And honored Christ. But John Paul specifically, and I have a quote by him, he said basically socialism has an idea of a mass responsibility, but we all have an individual responsibility to God, and that is how we are going to be judged. I'm just paraphrasing. But so that Pope was very important to the freedom revolutions and casting off communism in Eastern Europe.
Absolutely. And then as you take a walk, it gets more Christian as you walk up the Beacon Street, Beacon Hillside. On that side, you'll see facing the common it's a beautiful, bas relief on the side. It was the depicting the early settlement of Boston, 1629. On the other side are quotes from John Winthrop. I think I can't remember who. And then Governor Curley, Mayor Curley. And all of them, Governor Winthrop in his famous speech, what you're going to talk about on the Arbella, the ship, and he makes reference to Boston as the city set on a hill. And that comes out of, I believe it's Matthew 5. And he basically saying that, this is going to be an example to the whole world, and we better not fail God in our mission to have this Christian commonwealth, something to that effect. And that was put there, interesting enough, the Boston's 300th anniversary, September 17th. That's kind of interesting. That was the same as the Constitution Day. That's when the Constitution was actually sent out to the various states for ratification. And then as you walk up across from the State House is the famous 54th Regiment, the beautiful monument commemorating the 54th, the all-black regiment that fought very bravely in the Civil War, very gallantly. On the other side of that is a verse from Proverbs. And so, just walking around the common, there's about I would say most of the monuments have Christian references. And then you go to Public Garden, and the Public Garden, there are the two major gates. and that it has in very large lettering that Latin verse from First Kings talking about, may God favor us. And then there's a statue of Edward Everett Hale. Now, he was a Unitarian pastor, minister, and, theologically liberal. Of course, in those days, I would say he'd be kicked out of most Unitarian churches today. It says right on the statue, preacher of the gospel. Then you take a walk. There's a Parkman, George Robert White. He was one of the philanthropists, businessman, and that his foundation still exists today. They built a lot of city hospitals and things of this nature, parks and what have you. There's a statue, and there's an Old Testament reference. I can't remember the exact verse. And then the ether monument, the monument dedicated to the first successful use of ether in the world, I believe, which took place at Mass General Hospital in the 1840s. It's just an interesting coincidence that my ancestor, Mayor Nathaniel Shurtleff, was the one who presided over the unveiling. And there's a verse from Revelations and a verse from Isaiah. And then you go over to the William Ellery Channing's statue, which is on the corner of Arlington Street. Now, again, he was a Unitarian minister. In those days, considered liberal. Today, I guess he'd probably be kicked out of the Unitarian Church. But there's numerous Christian references, inscribed right there on the statue on both sides. So if we're so secular and this, to even make reference to God is a horrible thing, then why don't we just rip all these things down, Tom? Why are these still here? I mean, hasn't Marty Walsh figured this out by now? Mayor Menino when Mayor Menino had this similar hostility, the idea that Chick-fil-A, owned by a conservative businessman, a Christian businessman that isn't afraid to put his money where his mouth is, well, that was a horrible thing, and there's no way that would be on our Freedom Trail. You see, so but you walk the Freedom Trail, you're going to see all these Christian references and biblical references, Tom. I'm telling you.
Not only biblical references, but churches.
Churches, too, yeah. And it's interesting, Tom, and I just learned this. The Arlington Street Church, now, to me, to quote our dear friend, Reverend Kraft, it's an abomination. This church does not promote the gospel of Jesus Christ. It may have years and years ago, long before it became what it is today. But
yes, the rainbow flag is diametrically opposed to the flag that we are trying to fly.
Exactly. So I went in there, and there was a little history that the Massachusetts ratifying convention to ratify the U.S. Constitution convened. Now, not that particular building, but an older building. It actually convened in the church. And even today, Tom, many people, when they cast their vote, they'll go down to the local polling booth, a polling station, and many of them, even today, are held in churches. Now,
yes.
I live in West Roxbury section of Boston. I vote in the Roach Center, but across the street is a Catholic church where people vote. On the top of the hill here, and not far from my home, is I think it's an Orthodox church where the people vote. Greek Orthodox church where they vote there. And it's pretty consistent. I mean, all over Boston, many people vote in churches. And the meeting house, this is an old term for a church. It was called a meeting house. Well, it wasn't just used for church services. It was used for public meetings. People would gather there.
Yes, those town meetings that we talked about. You had the town meetings held in the churches, and those wonderful, oh my goodness, Faneuil Hall is sort of like that, but the Old South Meeting House is probably the best example we have in New England. And Old South is, of course, where they met just before the Boston Tea Party in that meeting house.
They actually
and that's on the Freedom Trail, too, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. So you have to say freedom and liberty and Christianity are somehow connected, aren't they? Is it a coincidence that when you walk by these churches, it was Alex de Tocqueville, the Frenchman that came here in the 1840s, and he said, what made America different? And he did take exception to the slavery. He didn't gloss over that, but he said that America is great because America is good. Yes. He said he went to the churches where righteousness was proclaimed from the pulpits. And he said that's what made America great. If I
may segue, while we still have time, from de Tocqueville's wonderful quote, to a bit from Winthrop City on a Hill while we're
Please,
still
yes.
on the air. So he says this is a wonderful speech given on the Arabella before they even stepped off the ship.
And that was the name of the ship, yeah. The Arabella.
Yeah, 1630. It's the same year that Boston was founded. And he speaks of upholding a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, liberality. We must delight in each other and make others rejoice together, mourn together, labor, suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission, our community, and our work. It speaks of the same body. The Lord will be our God and delight to dwell among us, and his own people will command a blessing upon us in all our ways. And he goes on, but then there is the possibility that we would go the other way. They understood that. They were always cognizant that you're only a generation or two away from falling apart, that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world. We shall open the mouths of enemies to speak evil of the ways of God, and all professors, interesting, he uses that word, for God's sake, we shall shame the faces of many of God's worthy servants and cause their prayers to be turned into curses upon us until we be consumed out of the good land whither we are going. This is the city on the hill. Boston is that city on the hill. So have we held, this is a question at this time, is Boston a city where these people would be welcome? Is Harvard a place where John Harvard would be welcome today?
Absolutely not.
Yes. I agree, and so it's up to us. We're the remnant to at least to demonstrate our faith, and one way or the other, I agree with that. On Boston City Hall Plaza, we will try to raise that flag. By the way, a flag is called a standard. And
that's right, a standard.
Yes, and this is a definition, a flag indicating the presence of a sovereign. So that flag indicates the presence of a sovereign, and that sovereign is Christ. And that was the standard that was raised in 1630 over Boston. And that is what that flag represents. We recognize Christ as our sovereign. We recognize his power, truth, and love, as those early Puritans did, and we don't back away from that point.
And, Tom, that's why it's so repugnant to people like the Mayor Marty Walsh, who basically is the CEO of Boston Incorporated, and his opinion that the folks that run the show find it repugnant. Any positive reference to Christianity other than lip service, oh, God bless America, God bless Boston. They don't know what God are they talking about. The same God that John Winthrop served, I don't believe that's the same God, because if they did, he would have more. He wouldn't be promoting what he promotes. So that's really the issue behind this flag.
Right.
I mean, if we just said, hey, this is Camp Constitution's official flag, they wouldn't even give it as a second thought. But then we're there under false pretenses. No, we're there. We're there saying, look, this is part of our history, but it's more than that. It's not just a symbol. It's a reality here. That's why they're afraid of that flag. That's why they'll fly every other flag under the sun. The communist Chinese flag, the Cuban communist flag. And they've flown nations' flags, which is illegal, but with Christian references. But most people have no idea that the Portuguese flag has marked, the 30 pieces of silver portrayed that were used to pay up Judas. Also,
right.
The victory of the over the Muslims. You talk about Islamophobic. You see, so most people don't know that. They just see it's a foreign flag, so it must be good. Anything but U.S. flag. So anyway, I think we're just about out of time, Tom. We're out of time. Hey, thanks again for being a guest or guest host. And you've been listening to Camp Constitution Radio. Visit our website, campconstitution.net. And until next week, may God richly bless you.